dive into the forgotten world of Timbuktu, the ancient desert city where camel caravans carried salt and gold, and scholars penned knowledge that echoed through centuries. Once at the heart of Africa's intellectual and commercial glory, discover how Timbuktu became the unlikely crossroad of books and business. From majestic mosques to mysterious manuscripts buried in the sand, this is not just a story about a city. It's a revelation of what the world once knew and nearly lost. What if I told you that in the middle of the Saharan desert, hidden beneath the scorching sands, lay a city that once held more knowledge than most of Europe? A city where merchants carried gold, salt, and scrolls, where markets echoed with the call of traders and minarets rose beside mud brick libraries holding secrets of the stars, medicine, law, and theology. This city existed, and its name was Timbuktu. You've probably heard the name in passing, maybe as a metaphor for the middle of nowhere. But what if I told you that this so-called nowhere was once the heart of African intellect and trade? Picture this: thousands of miles of unforgiving desert. Then a caravan appears, hundreds of camels marching in silence, loaded with salt slabs and gold nuggets, heading to a city where scholars debate astronomy in candlelit courtyards and scribes copy ancient Greek, Arabic, and African texts by hand. Timbuktu was that beacon in the sand. But how did such a city rise in such an unforgiving place? Why were scholars from distant lands drawn to it? And more importantly, why did the world forget? The answer isn't simple. It's a tale of power, faith, curiosity, and the quiet war between memory and erasure. In this video, we'll uncover the rise of Timbuktu, its dazzling golden age, and the dark forces that nearly erased its legacy. We'll dive into the dusty manuscripts, the legendary rulers, and the sprawling trade routes that made this city one of history's greatest wonders. This is not just a story of Africa, it's a story of human brilliance. And it starts here with a question: what if everything we thought we knew about Africa was wrong? Before it was a name whispered in wonder, Timbuktu was little more than a seasonal campsite, a speck on the vast canvas of the Sahara. According to oral traditions, it began as a settlement around a well founded by Tuareg nomads who stopped to rest, to water their animals, to survive. Over time, that tiny cluster of tents hardened into mud brick homes. A village was born, not by design but by necessity. The year was roughly the 12th century. The region was Mali, a crossroads of worlds. To the north, the Mediterranean. To the south, the forests of West Africa. To the east, the rich kingdoms of the Nile. And Timbuktu sat in the middle, a geographical accident with extraordinary consequences. Its position on the Niger River's bend gave it water and transport. But more than that, it became the meeting point of ancient trade routes. Caravans trudged in from all directions, their camels packed with salt, gold, ivory, slaves, and ideas. Timbuktu wasn't just a market, it was a melting pot of influence. People spoke different tongues, wore different cloths, prayed in different ways. By the early 1300s, it had grown far beyond a trade post. The name Timbuktu became synonymous not just with commerce, but with culture. Word spread of its grand mosques and rising minarets. Pilgrims and scholars came in droves. And as Islam spread southward from North Africa, Timbuktu embraced it, not as conquerors do, but as curious seekers. With Islam came literacy, and with literacy, libraries. But even then, Timbuktu's true treasure wasn't its gold or salt. It was the knowledge carried in ink-stained scrolls and carefully copied manuscripts. And it all began, ironically, poetically, with a well in the desert. This was the beginning of a miracle carved from dust. In the blazing heat of the Sahara, a slow and silent army advanced. Camels, hundreds of them, marching in single file, each one a ship in the desert sea. These were the salt caravans, and they were lifelines. Timbuktu's wealth didn't fall from the sky. It arrived grain by grain, hoofprint by hoofprint across punishing terrain. The trans-Saharan trade routes were as treacherous as they were vital, and yet, for centuries, they pulsed with life, carrying salt from the mines of Tahaza, gold from the forests of the south, textiles, copper, cola nuts, and even books from the Mediterranean coast. Salt was more than seasoning. It preserved life in a world without refrigeration. In West Africa, salt was quite literally worth its weight in gold. Entire economies thrived on it, and Timbuktu, perfectly placed between salt mines and gold fields, became the exchange point where the desert's lifeblood flowed. Caravans were enormous, some stretching for miles, taking months to complete a single round trip. The men who guided them were hardened by sun and silence. They traveled by stars, carried their own food and water, and often faced bandits, sandstorms, and starvation. But for those who survived, Timbuktu was the reward. Markets exploded with color and noise. Goods from Ghana, Morocco, Egypt, and beyond were traded beside spices, silk, and livestock. The city's reputation as a neutral ground for fair commerce attracted buyers from empires near and far. Trade brought wealth, but it also brought ideas. With every transaction came conversation, and from conversation, culture bloomed. Here, economics and intellect were intertwined. The merchants weren't just traders, they were cultural diplomats, moving between worlds, carrying not just products but philosophies and knowledge. And as the gold and salt exchanged hands, another kind of currency took root, the value of ideas. Timbuktu's markets thrived, but its soul resided elsewhere, in parchment and ink, in whispered debates, in the minds of those who sought not gold, but truth. When Islam arrived in West Africa, it didn't just bring religion. It brought literacy, architecture, law, science, and above all, a reverence for knowledge. As the faith spread along trade routes, so too did Arabic, the Quran, and scholarly traditions. Timbuktu embraced them wholeheartedly. What began with a few learned men gathering in courtyards soon blossomed into full-fledged centers of learning. Among them, none was more famous than the University of Sankore. Built around a mosque, Sankore was no ordinary school. It rivaled the likes of Al-Azhar in Cairo and Cordoba in Spain. At its height, Timbuktu hosted over 25,000 students and housed over 700,000 manuscripts, a staggering number for any medieval city. Here, knowledge wasn't just consumed, it was produced. Students studied theology, law, astronomy, mathematics, grammar, logic, geography, and medicine. The curriculum was rigorous, and advancement depended not on age, but on mastery. Scholars were examined orally, grilled on precision, argumentation, and interpretation. Education was deeply personal and incredibly thorough. It was not uncommon for a scholar from Timbuktu to spend decades teaching, writing, and mentoring students across generations. Many rose to international acclaim, their treatises requested as far away as Istanbul, Fez, and even Delhi. But what made Timbuktu different wasn't just its knowledge, it was its humility. Scholars were revered not for their wealth, but for their wisdom and piety. And this reverence created a society where the mind was as prized as the merchant's pouch. This wasn't just a city with schools. This was a city that believed thinking itself was a divine act. In Timbuktu, to learn was to serve something higher than yourself. If Sankore was the beating heart of Timbuktu's scholarship, then its manuscripts were the soul. These weren't just dusty scrolls. They were treasures, hand-copied legacies of thought, theology, science, and survival. Over centuries, families in Timbuktu became custodians of knowledge, building private libraries within their homes. These manuscripts, passed down through generations, were not hoarded but shared. loaned to students, debated in study circles, cherished like heirlooms. Some were richly illuminated with calligraphy and gold leaf. Others were plain but profound, written in careful Arabic script on fragile Saharan paper or even animal skin. Their subjects spanned a staggering spectrum: astronomy, pharmacology, law, mathematics, philosophy, music, and even sex education. There were treatises on malaria, guides to ethical leadership, poetry anthologies, and meticulous commentaries on the Quran. And all of it was African. These texts are a rebuke to the lie that Africa had no written history. Timbuktu's libraries held entire centuries of intellectual output. Scholars cited Greek philosophers alongside West African poets. They asked questions, challenged ideas, proposed theories. This was a culture in dialogue with the world and with itself. And the scale? Unbelievable. Scholars estimate 700,000 to 1 million manuscripts may have once been housed across Timbuktu. Some were buried beneath sand for protection. Others hidden in crates concealed from colonizers, warlords, and thieves. The lengths to which families went to protect these documents are staggering, a testimony to their value. Today, some of these manuscripts are crumbling, others being restored. But each page turned is a rediscovery, each inked line a spark from a long, quiet fire. They are whispers of a golden age, written by the hands of Black African scholars whose intellect shaped an era. Timbuktu wasn't just a place that kept books. It was a civilization that believed in the written word as a sacred legacy, worthy of eternal protection. No story of Timbuktu's greatness is complete without the name Mansa Musa, the emperor whose wealth stunned the world, and whose devotion elevated his empire to legendary status. Mansa Musa ruled the Mali Empire in the 14th century, and under his reign, Timbuktu flourished like never before. He didn't just inherit a kingdom, he built a legacy, and his most famous act, a pilgrimage that would change everything. In 1324, Musa made the Hajj to Mecca, traveling with tens of thousands of attendants and camels, so laden with gold that he caused inflation in cities he passed. Cairo, Medina, and Mecca reeled from his generosity. The world took notice. European scribes wrote of a king from Africa so wealthy he could bankrupt cities with kindness. Maps soon began to show Mali, and often Timbuktu marked with a crown and a gold nugget. But Musa wasn't just a showman. He returned home with architects, scholars, and visionaries. He invested in mosques, schools, and libraries. It was under his guidance that Timbuktu transformed from a prosperous town into a cosmopolitan hub of trade and learning. He commissioned the construction of Jingwereber Mosque, which still stands today, made of mud and wood, defying centuries of erosion and time. His impact was more than economic, it was cultural, intellectual, and spiritual. Mansa Musa elevated the status of scholars, encouraged literacy, and positioned Mali as a beacon of Islamic thought. Timbuktu became the crown jewel of his empire, a shining node in the global web of ideas and commerce. Mansa Musa didn't just put Timbuktu on the map, he made it matter. And through his leadership, he demonstrated the power of combining wealth with wisdom. Under his rule, Timbuktu wasn't merely rich, it was radiant, and for a golden moment in time, this desert city wasn't just part of history, it was the very center of it. No civilization shines forever, and for Timbuktu the descent began quietly, like a whisper swallowed by the sand. By the late 16th century, the Golden Age had dimmed. The empire of Mali had weakened, and regional rivals nipped at its borders. Internal divisions, shifting trade routes, and the rise of Atlantic seaports chipped away at Timbuktu's relevance. But the greatest blow came not from erosion or economics, but from invasion. In 1591, the Moroccan army, armed with firearms and ambition, crossed the desert and conquered Timbuktu. The invaders weren't scholars, they were soldiers. They looted the libraries, exiled the intellectuals, and crushed the scholarly institutions that had taken centuries to build. Timbuktu fell, not in flames, but in silence. Trade diminished. The great caravans no longer flowed with the same force. Students stopped coming. Manuscripts were hidden, buried, forgotten. Some were burned. Others were smuggled out, tucked into walls or buried in trunks beneath homes. The pulse of the city slowed, and over time, the world turned its gaze elsewhere. The rise of colonialism would only deepen the wound. European powers ignored or dismissed Timbuktu's scholarly legacy, often portraying Africa as a continent without culture or intellect. The myth of a dark continent was easier to sell than the truth, that Timbuktu had once rivaled the great universities of the world. And yet, even in decline, the city endured. Its people remembered. Quietly, defiantly, they protected what remained. Through oral traditions, secret safekeeping, and sheer resilience, Timbuktu refused to vanish. The decline was real, but so was the determination to survive. And while its towers may have crumbled, its legacy was not erased. It simply waited, buried beneath sand and time, for someone to uncover it once more. Centuries passed. Empires rose and fell. The world forgot Timbuktu. But in silence, in secrecy, the city's soul remained intact. The manuscripts, thousands of them, survived the centuries not in museums, but in private homes, passed from parent to child, hidden behind walls, wrapped in cloth, buried in wooden trunks. They were cared for not by institutions, but by families who understood their worth even when the world did not. Then, in the late 20th and early 21st centuries, the world began to look back. Scholars, journalists, and historians returned to Timbuktu, drawn by rumors of hidden knowledge. What they found was astonishing. Vast libraries in mud brick houses, crumbling texts in need of preservation, entire rooms filled with scrolls on medicine, philosophy, astronomy, and law. Local efforts led by people like Abdel Kader Haidara, a librarian turned hero, became central to the manuscript's survival. When jihadist militants threatened Timbuktu in 2012, Haidara led a secret operation, smuggling over 350,000 manuscripts out of the city under the cover of night. He used boats, carts, backpacks, even taxis to move them to safety in Bamako, the capital. It was a race against destruction, and they won. These weren't just rescue missions. They were acts of defiance against ignorance, extremism, and the erasure of African history. They were also acts of faith in a future that would once again value the wisdom of the past. Today, efforts continue to preserve, digitize, and study these manuscripts. They're being translated, scanned, and archived, so the world can finally see the depth of African scholarship once ignored. But more than anything, the rediscovery of these texts challenges a lie, that Africa was only oral, that it had no books, no scholars, no systems of thought. The manuscripts say otherwise. They are proof, inked and eternal, that Timbuktu never truly vanished. It was simply waiting patiently for the world to remember. What remains of Timbuktu today? Mud brick mosques, crumbling walls, a skyline carved from sun and sand. But look closer and you'll see more than ruins. You'll see a memory that refuses to fade. Timbuktu is more than a city. It's a symbol, a challenge, a reminder that the world is far richer, far deeper than the stories we're often told. It reminds us that Africa was not in the margins of history, but at its very center. That Black scholars, thinkers, and leaders didn't just participate in civilization, they helped shape it. Today, Timbuktu stands as a beacon, not of what was lost, but of what survives. It teaches us the power of resilience, the ability of a people to protect their culture even when the world forgets. It shows us the sacred value of knowledge and the devastating cost of forgetting it. The manuscripts of Timbuktu are not just historical artifacts. They are living voices. They speak of a world where trade and thought moved together, where books were worth more than bullion, and where education was a spiritual duty. They challenge stereotypes and restore dignity. Timbuktu's story proves something powerful, that knowledge doesn't belong to one region, one race, or one time. It's universal, and when preserved, it becomes a lighthouse, guiding future generations through the fog of ignorance. And so, as we dust off the pages and decode the scripts, we are not just remembering Timbuktu, we are rediscovering ourselves. We are rewriting the narratives that erased Africa's genius and reminding the world that truth, once written, has a stubborn way of surviving. Timbuktu still matters, not just for what it was, but for what it proves, that even buried under centuries of silence, truth can never truly be erased. So if you've made it this far, like this video, share it, and don't forget to subscribe. Because the past isn't over, it's just waiting to be told.